Hello, everybody. My name is Gilda Ross. I'm the Glenbard Student and Community Projects Coordinator. I know that you are just as excited as I am because I've heard from so many of you already congratulating us about this amazing pairing that we have. Aliza Pressman, the author of The 5 Principles of Parenting, in conversation with one of our favorites at GPS, Lisa Damour, The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. This is going to be a great chat, and I'm so grateful to you for the gift of your time. I'm also grateful to the sponsors who have made it possible. You saw their names, the promotional partners. Our ask of all of you is to please share the resource of GPS. It is for everyone, everywhere, down the block, around the street. You will come away with real world tools that you can put to use immediately. You will always walk away with something, and sometimes the something becomes everything. So thank you again. I really appreciate your being here. Quickly, what's coming up as we kick off our 30th year of the Glenbard Parent Series? Let me tell you about some of the important programs we have planned next week. Amy Cuddy will be with us on Monday. She will be in conversation with Rosalind Wiseman. She's the author of Queen Bees and Wannabes, Confidence and Body Language for Social Bravery. That's on Monday, noon and 7 p.m. On Tuesday, we are welcoming the author of a book called How to Raise a Healthy Gamer, Navigate Power Struggles and Build Better Screen Habits. Again, on Tuesday, noon and 7 p.m. On Wednesday, we'll have our kickoff for our early childhood programs when Dr. Anne-Louise Lockhart joins us for solutions for fear and worry and anxiety in young children. Our first week in September, on Wednesday the 4th, we'll be welcoming Becky Kennedy, and she'll be in conversation with Lori Gottlieb, the author of You Should Talk to Someone. Lots planned. Circle your calendar. Be sure you check out our brochure of over 50 programs that we have organized for this year. You won't want to miss a one. And now it's my honor to introduce our superintendent for the Glenbard Schools, Dr. David Larson, who will do the introductions. Dr.
Thank you,
Larson.
Gilda. Yeah, I get to introduce the kickoff. Thanks, Gilda and her team. What a docket of speakers, especially starting with today. Thanks to GPS. Thank you to our many sponsors. What a privilege to have a parent series sponsored by the district, but open to the all of DuPage County and the greater Chicago area. We're so privileged to have these outstanding speakers that help us understand and navigate those parenting years, all ages. Let me first, just a little quick thank you to our students, teachers, and parents. We're kicking off a new schedule this year at Glenbard. Last year, we had the Glenbard Hour, 2 periods a week for advocacy and agency. This year, we do the Wednesdays and Thursday block time. And so we made it through yesterday with ease, and today's the second day. So really, really excited about the new opportunities for deep learning and obviously the conditions for a great environment for learning and thriving for our students at Glenbard. So on to the introductions. We have 2 top caliber presenters, writers, authors today. We have Dr. Lisa Damour, who'll be introducing Dr. Aliza Pressman, excuse me. Dr. Damour is the author of 3 New York Times bestsellers, Untangled, Under Pressure, and The Emotional Lives of Teenagers. She's a regular contributor to the New York Times and the CBS News, and the creator of Untangled 10 to 20, a digital library to support teens and their caregivers. She'll be interviewing Aliza Pressman, Dr. Aliza Pressman. Dr. Pressman is a developmental psychologist with nearly 2 decades of experience working with families and the healthcare providers who care for them. She's the author of the important New York Times bestseller, The 5 Principles of Parenting, Your Essential Guide to Raising Good Humans, and the host of award-winning podcast, Raising Good Humans. She's the co-founder, director of the Mount Sinai Parenting Center, and is an assistant clinical professor in the Mount Sinai Medical School. Wow, 2 powerful people today. Take it away, both of you, Lisa and Aliza.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, Aliza, let's get down to it.
Okay.
Okay, so
That's
I
a
have
good
your
school
book.
year.
I know, here we are, and I've got your book right here too. So I'm going to ask a very conventional question out of the gate, but I think it's still a really important question, which is, why did you write this book? And the reason I think it's important to ask is that it's a huge commitment to write a book and to try to bring it into the world. And I know that anytime I've done it, I'm like, there's a reason, there's something that's driving me, there's something that I feel needs to be said that isn't being said. So what got you to write this book?
Well, Lisa, who I love so much, um, I really didn't want to write a book because I felt like including especially your three magnificent books, there's so many incredible books out there who've been written by colleagues I just love and respect. And there are so many books out there in general. So I didn't want to write a book because I didn't want to add more to sort of the pile of to-do list. And at the same time, I felt like, oh, there's so much out there. How can I take my perspective as a developmental psychologist, where I'm really rooted in sort of the how we came to be who we are and the social, emotional, and cognitive development, of the lifespan. How can I take that and distill it down to what really, really, really matters in any context for parents in case they don't have time for all the content that's out there. And I wanted to maybe simplify what has become a really intensely complex. It's complicated to raise kids, as we know, and it's a complex experience to be a human, but it's not that complicated of a science.
I really appreciate you saying that. And it's funny because one of the things I've been thinking about and reading about is intensive parenting, right? That we find ourselves in this very interesting moment historically where parents are trying harder than they ever have, feel like there's so many ways they can get it wrong, that getting it right is, like you said, complicated and requires constant vigilance. Um, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. You grew up in the 70s and 80s. It wasn't always this way in terms of how we were cared for ourselves. And so what I love about your book is I feel like you've stepped into this space where there is too much guidance, I think, in some ways, hard to know what's to even worth focusing on, helped us to narrow in on just pay attention to this. And really you gave us 5 things and we're going to work our way through it. And that your opinion about what we should pay attention to isn't your opinion. It is taking the breadth of the field, mucking around in it for a whole career, and then saying, having mucked around in all of this, these are the 5 things. Just look at these 5 things. Like that is such a huge and wonderful gift, and never more needed, I think, than the moment we find ourselves in as parents.
Thank you. And obviously you, Lisa, you might not know this, nobody would know this, but she was one of the first people, if not the first person that I said, can you just like look at what I'm thinking about to help me figure this out? But importantly, if it were just about content knowledge, Lisa and I would be, I think, perfect parents, right? Like we would be like, oh, this is no big deal. We've got this. So I think that part of what's going on is that we take so much information in, we want so much information, and also we want to give good information that's useful and usable. But not so much that it makes us rigid and overwhelmed and feeling like if we don't get it just so, we've screwed up our kids.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think gives a sort of a sigh of relief are these 5 principles because they're kind of in our control, and not that they're not that hard. Um, but I also think with just great humility, I, I, I I can't speak for Lisa, but I can say for me, with all of the information that I have, I blow it daily with my kids.
Oh,
And so that's just important to know.
100%. And we're going to get right down. I'm going to start asking you some very concrete questions about the application of what's in the book. But yes, to that point. So I had a kid start 8th grade today.
Yay!
I have a kid starting 15th grade in a couple weeks. She's going back to college to be a junior. And let me tell you how I already messed it up this morning. So
Oh,
I it's her first day of school. She wanted to walk to the bus by herself, and I have been, I think like many parents, waiting for her to get going into the school year. And so I felt really like a crummy parent when it was an hour and a half after she sent the text that I read it saying, I'm on the bus. So I wrote back going, good job, knowing fully that she was probably already into third period and I had not been available even on the first day of school. So you're right. You're right. Okay, let's get down to it. We are back to school. Your 5 principles. I'm just going to take them one at a time.
Okay.
Here we are, back to school thinking about relationships. And I want you to take this up from 2 frameworks. One is, what kinds of pressure can starting the school year put on the relationship between parent and child? And you can think across any point in development. And then the other is, how do we help kids manage all of the social anxieties at the start of the school year? So starting just with the like, you're sending your kid back to school, your relationship is like, I already had quite the not great morning. I mean, not fatal, but not my best work. Um, Talk to us about relationships at home and relationships at school.
Well, I love that you gave the example just because I think we start off the school year kind of focused on a lot of our goals for ourselves and our kids and their academic, and they're thinking about their social lives, and they're thinking about the limits that we're setting and screens and all things. And why I wanted relationship to be such a huge focus was none of those things are going to really matter if our relationship is compromised. So if we're so fixated on getting it all done or making sure that everything went just so, or the getting on the bus, of course she has to get on the bus. And of course we have to hopefully at some point say like, yay, you got there. But really the important thing is that we know our kids are going to come home and at some point know that if they want to talk about something, we're available. And we know that we're going to share a laugh. And maybe the laugh in your case is going to be because it took you an hour and a half. Like you trust her so much and you were so not worried about it that you were like, yeah, of course you got on the bus. This is not a worry of mine, so much so that I forgot to check. And so to me, the relationship part kind of gets undermined sometimes with the frenetic energy of making the perfect back to school life. So that's part one. Because I just think we take relationship kind of for granted, or we don't really think of it as a category to build and work on. And I think of it as kind of, and when I say I really don't, it's not my unique thought. This is so steeped in the literature about how humans thrive. So I think that's the big thing is when we're thinking about our organization of the first, start of the school year, what have we carved out space to be functioning enough as people that we are available to be in a close relationship with our kids? And when I say close, I don't mean that, everybody's intertwined and enmeshed in such a way that they can't just be like, yeah, it was a fine day and they close their door and they do their thing. More like, are we available to each other to laugh, to cry, to be in conversation, and to just know that we're connected?
So
I
to,
can see you want to say something, so
well,
I'm
I want to push down a road that you started down. Okay, so it happens all the time, right? Like kids go to school. I mean, she will come home from her first day of 8th grade. Though I missed the text, I am very curious about how her day will have gone. There is a very high likelihood she's going to do exactly what you described, which is make a beeline for her room, shut the door, and if she tells me anything, it may be a bunch of gripes, right? Okay. So my experience, and I think a lot of parents' experiences, it can hurt it can hurt when you've been waiting to hear about how the day went when the kid goes right by you. It's also both disheartening, and I will also just say the words, I think it's sometimes kind of annoying when kids just complain and complain and complain about the day. How would you, through the lens of relationship, what guidance would you give parents around the kid who doesn't feel like talking or the kid who, when they are talking, it's kind of the downbeat of the day?
I have to acknowledge how ridiculous it is in some ways to be saying this to you where I can't see anybody else's face because I'm like, it's you. It's Lisa. Thanks, Gilda. So, but my go-to thought is like, this is not personal. And relationships have nothing to do with like the content that you receive back about how the day was. So let's not measure our closeness with our kids based on whether they're a discloser immediately or not. And let's think about like, what do they need right now? Because a real relationship isn't about us. It's about two people and what both of those people need to feel safe connecting with each other. So if you aren't thinking about yourself and your needs of, I am desperate to hear how this day went because I want to know that really we just want to know that it was okay. Then you can focus on, well, what does my kid need right now? And then it also gives them permission in life, which I think we all would love that permission to just be embedded in us, is like, I'm not required to share when I'm tired and, like overwhelmed and whatever. I can be in a relationship where somebody's paying attention and attuned and I'm paying attention, and unless it's like grandma and it's disrespectful, let's just say we'll talk when we talk. And the other thing is, of course, they're going to, and I know that we kind of know this, but we have to remind ourselves. I certainly have to remind myself constantly. You can't be in 8th grade and gripe to your friends all day about how terrible they are, or how the teacher looked at you, or what you feel like in your outfit, or what class you got assigned, or like what party you were not invited to, or how stupid somebody is. Because that would not be a socially adaptive way to be. But when you come home and you have this human, in this case, it's Lisa, the mother, who's like, they're going to love you even if you have 40 things to gripe about. So that's a good person to gripe to. And of course, we don't need to, if it's like a 2-hour gripe session, maybe it's like, okay, let's take a pause from griping so we don't get too invested in like bonding over griping. But of course, this is like where you get to just let it out, let your inner life just come out to the safe person. And it's hard. I mean, I experience it all the time because I have a 9th grader and a 12th grader, and it's hard not to interrupt griping every 5 minutes with, yeah, but what about all the awesome? Or I wonder if it's because, and all the things that we do because we want to manage the griping so that they feel positive and excited about the next day. It's just not as personal as we take it.
Man, oh man, I love that. Okay,
I'll forget it later today when my daughter's
I know,
griping.
exactly. No, same, same. Well, I should like tattoo it on my arm, like,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Um, the social landscape of school is so
Right.
big and complicated, and it means different things to kids at different ages, right? For younger kids, it may not be at the center of what they're most concerned about. For very young kids, it may be about being away from home and anxieties about that. But as the mother of a middle schooler, I know that it is front and center and really predominates in its importance. And then, kids sort it out as they get older. Usually give us some posts about like when to worry about our kids' relationships, right? There's so much variance in the typical. Kids have little groups, they have big groups, they, are very socially busy, they're not so socially busy. That's all in the typical. When should we worry about our kids' social relationships?
So I'm going to pivot this back to you in a second because I think you have beautiful things to say about it. I just want to answer a little bit and tell you one thing that my daughter said that I just thought was such just a perfect moment of, she had her first day of 9th grade yesterday. And she came home and said, everybody's mellowed out so much. And I thought, you know, yes, the like science tells us that that's kind of going to be the case, but boy, was it fun to hear those words of just that observation of, it is middle school and high school have they have such a distinct feeling. And I think she really felt it day one. I mean, there's going to be I'm sure we'll hear today that that was the opposite. But I do think if your kids are coming home and they are, for the most part, doing typical gripes that you've heard before and you'll hear again, and then they're laughing and talking to the very same people they're griping about, and they're going about the day, I'm not worried at all. And I think that that's just like the ebb and flow of the social worlds of these kids. And if your fifth grader comes home and they feel like their best friend from last year has made new friends and they're kind of confused about where to be because the groups are starting to shift a little bit, and it's not like middle school, but it feels like, oh man, this is earlier than I thought. That doesn't worry me either. And I think part of those things are just, let's be prepared developmentally for what's coming our way, as, you know, I would say as early as fourth grade, when like friendship starts to get trickier, and fifth grade and sixth grade, and certainly seventh and eighth grade. It doesn't worry me when it's like we've read this story over and over again. And I just don't want us, the parents, to confuse the discomfort of our kids from what happens very typically in school with there's a big problem. But I think when it starts to become the center of everything they're talking about in circles over and over, and it's impacting everything they enjoy, and it's making it so that there is no time for the giggles and connection that they have with you, then I would absolutely worry. And I would ask Lisa, because this is when to worry, I think is a really great skill of yours, sharing that. Other markers of when to worry, apart from the typical like changes in sleeping and eating and all the stuff that we know to worry about.
So I agree with everything you said, and how you said it. I think, I'll just push it a little further in terms of when to worry. And my work centers on adolescence. So this is stuff that's, you're more likely to see as kids get a little older. We worry about bullying, either as a perpetrator or a victim. And I think it's important though to be clear about what bullying is. That bullying is not kids not getting along. That's just conflict. And there's no way kids are going to get along all the time because they have to spend all day, every day with a whole bunch of kids they did not choose. So like conflict is a done deal. Bullying is if a child is being systematically targeted by one kid or a group of kids and they cannot defend themselves. That is not conflict. That is highly problematic. And you're going to want to work really closely with folks at school,
Right.
move, move carefully, slowly into this. Well-meaning adults sometimes make it worse, because they are so upset and anxious, as of course they would be. So that's for me when to really worry about a kid's social landscape. The other, and this is especially true for adolescents, but it's true throughout development, social isolation. Kids need a friend. They do not need big
Hey,
network. A friend.
yeah.
And maybe two. But beyond that, it's icing. They do not need large social groups. Kids are really into big social groups these days. I don't know if it's in the wake of the pandemic, the anxieties around being connected have gone up. But we've looked, Aliza, this research, we've looked at this research for years. Like the least stressed kids have one or two good
Just a
buddies.
couple friends.
Yeah.
It's interesting you point that out. And well, first, just along the lines of bullying, I just want to remind everybody at the beginning of the school year, being a jerk is not being a bully. And that's just really important. And I know jerk isn't a nice thing to say, but I do think we have to distinguish between somebody who's just like that is just like jerky behavior. Sorry, I shouldn't say being a jerk. Jerky behavior is something that just happens, and that's quite different than this sort of pervasive, intentional, individually oriented, mean-spirited, and persistent way of treating someone and where there's a power difference. And along the lines of like the one or two friends, or really two, because I do think if you have one friend, obviously it's we need one friend, but we also don't, I would probably worry if that relationship was like in such a way where one of the friends is like, well, you can't play with someone else, or you can't hang out with somebody else. And I think we all recognize that when that happens, which is quite different than just like two kids who just really love hanging out with each other and kind of think everybody else is a little bit annoying, like, great. Um, so that's really important. But I have heard, and I'm curious, Lisa, if you've heard this, I've heard a lot of people worrying about like, well, my adolescent isn't going out, or my middle schooler doesn't have plans on the weekends, or I'm really worried that they're not, they don't have a big group. And I'm not sure what that's about. Like if we take more comfort, or we're remembering a different kind of experience growing up, a different kind of childhood. So I want to, I mean, one of the reasons why reflection is the second of the principles in the book is what about that is actually a worry about our kids? And what about that is just us forgetting to reflect on our experience and what it felt like for us, and how much of that we're imposing on our expectations for our kids?
I love that. Well, let's go with reflection. Like,
Okay.
let's spend some more time there because I think we can both flesh out on this question of kids who do want to stay close to home on the weekends and seem not to be, it's not because they don't have options. Like that
Right.
just,
Just like,
yeah, I'd love for your, to share a little bit more about what you think is going on there. And then again, as we come into the start of the school year and all of the stresses and strains and excitement of it, like what kinds of reflection do you think would be most useful for families right now?
it's so, by the way, I just want to talk to you for hours. One of the one of the things that I think we have to pay attention to in terms of reflecting on our experiences, because this even happens with dating stuff. Like we just remember back to fifth grade, sixth grade, seventh grade, eighth grade, high school, and we have an idea about what it's supposed to be like. And it's really important to take the time to recognize that we have those ideas, to even think about what our experiences were, maybe what we wish we had had or didn't have, or what we wish our parents had done, any of those things. Just take the time. It's kind of fun to think back. Maybe it's painful too. And that way you come fresh when your kids are there with you, telling you about their day if you're lucky, and when you're observing them. And you're not coming in with the weight of your whole childhood experience in their, in the interaction you're having with them. And and in terms of what's going on with wanting to be home, for example, like I can see a world where, let's say I always had a plan for Friday and Saturday night, and that was like a really big part of my middle school experience. And so I'm concerned because my kid wants to stay home and kind of eat dinner and watch. I can't now, of course, I can't think of a single television show, but
My kids are like watching Gilmore Girls, like it's
I
the,
was just trying
they're
to
back
get
to Gilmore Girls.
Gilmore Girls out of my
Back
mouth.
to
I
it.
couldn't.
Yeah. I mean, I have no problem with it, but it's
Yeah,
like, it's back.
right. It's like Gilmore Girls over and over. Oh, they've watched it, by the way, and if you're a Gilmore Girl fan, you don't just watch that one time. You watch it over and over. It's like a security blanket. And so what's that about? And I wonder if, first of all, I think people are more comfortable at home these days. Like it's not that bad to be at home anymore. It's a very different world. And also a lot of kids have access to the outside world through, social media and their phones. And so they know what's happening, and they're connecting with their friends in their mind. And that's that. And so, but we're like keeping a nice cozy home. I don't know, for better or for worse, it's, this also, I've noticed this is a trend. I have no idea if it's evidence-based. Feels like you can get a driver's license, but do you really need to get a driver's license?
Some
And
evidence just came out on this.
oh,
They're not,
good. They're
yeah.
not getting it. So I'm seeing this constantly, and it's just like a lack of motivation to sort of do the things that when we were kids, we were like desperate to do, get out of the house, get the driver's license, get the, go away. And I think some of it's wonderful because it's just like we're a little bit more comfortable and connected. And some of it's probably not wonderful because we, the parents, might be doing everything we can to sort of make the world at home so easy and cozy that there's just no incentive. And also like there are times when I'm like, am I an Uber driver? Like, is that my actual job? But then I also kind of love the awesome time because I would say, I have two teenagers, like the a lot of the time where I get to really talk to them is in the car. I live in Los Angeles. There's piles of traffic. And so I sort of, I don't love driving all the time and I don't like getting interrupted, but I also love, just like they can't go anywhere. They have to either, sing with me or talk with me. So I do think it's interesting, but it is hard to launch when you have no incentive to launch.
Hmm. Um, isn't that interesting, right? Like, I mean, there is this sort of a close to homeness, and you brought up, this is a huge topic, but we're just going to go there for a moment.
Let's do it.
Yeah, the fact that kids do have access to digital technologies, right? So when we reflect, there's aspects of our own middle and high school experience that we can think about that map on really cleanly to our kids. Then there's this like whole new universe of stuff that is such a big part of their universe that we have no historical, kind of comparison for. Um, Families are right now super anxious about social media and its potential
Yeah,
impact.
let's do it.
When should a parent worry about the impact of social media on their kids?
I mean, this is another great thing to reflect on right now. I think there's a subset of parents who are really anxious about social media because it's in the zeitgeist, because it's scary, because it's overwhelming, because it's unfamiliar, because there are thousands of articles written daily about how it's destroying our children. And I think that the reflection part is, am I looking at my kids? Am I looking at what's happening in my household, or am I assuming that they are in the category of what I'm reading about, thinking about constantly and worrying about? I I I would not want anybody to underestimate the luxury that we have to reflect on that and really look at our individual kids. Because for some kids, if you already know that they have social problems in school, there are challenges for them, they're struggling to make friends, they are feeling, certainly if they're getting bullied, certainly if they're struggling with any kind of challenges with eating or mental health, of course, you should already worry because it will help you make better decisions about access and how you're doing it. But if your kid is thriving and they're doing great in real life and digitally, and you take the phone in at the high risk times at night and at mealtime, then, you might even have some rules around it, which we can certainly talk about. Like, you know what, in the car, it's my only time with you. So I'm sorry, but I can't look at my phone, you can't look at your phone, but you can, like, we're gonna listen to music. Whenever you decide as a parent or a family what that is, I like moments or sources of connection to me seem like good times to sort of say, like, we're not gonna use these phones right now, but everybody's doing okay. I would find something else to worry about. I would just say, like, this doesn't have to be on my worry plate right now, but here are like 30 things that I might be missing because I've decided that this is the absolute number one worry. And then for other kids, like I said, I think we know that there are kids for whom the negative impact will be massively amplified with access to social media. And so, yes, I'm going to worry about it and I'm going to make decisions accordingly.
Mhm. Thank
Wait,
you.
I already forgot what we were talking. I just
No,
lost.
no, you're right on track. This is fantastic. Okay, so next are the next principle is regulation. Okay, so I'm just going to paint a scenario for you. And you can take this at any developmental level or multiple developmental levels.
Okay.
Kid walks in the house from school, or you pick the kid up from school, melt down. They are a disaster. They are deeply upset about something that happened, maybe with a friend. They are just beside themselves. What should parents, what do caregivers, how do they walk into this moment?
So first we regulate ourselves.
Mm.
And that's really hard to do when the person that you love is a disaster and is feeling miserable and is melting down or tearing the house apart in their meltdown, or potentially saying things that just make you incredibly angry frankly, just because they're just lashing out. But not only because the research shows that when we have capacity to self-regulate, our kids are more likely in the long, bigger picture, so not necessarily in that moment, they'll have a better shot at having like a stronger self-regulation muscle, but also because we cannot make a decision about how to respond to this tornado if we ourselves are going to meet them where they are. So I think that that's the first thing. But the real reason I say that is because it's the only thing you can control. You can't like get your kid, whether they're 2 or 22, you cannot get someone to calm down. They get themselves to calm down with your support, and we can get ourselves to calm down, and ideally you have some support. So for all those reasons, the first thing that I would do is whatever I like to, this is maybe too long-winded, but I do like to think of it as like, we have to figure out the password to our personal alarm system. And so like, I know my passcode, and I know the one I use for my house alarm, and I know the one I use for my body alarm. And in fact, if I only noticed this during the pandemic, I think, which started a lot of Zooms, that when somebody's telling me something that is upsetting in any way, I typically have my hand on my heart. It's not on purpose. I think it's something I've been doing for so long that it just happens naturally. Even when we're talking about self-regulation, I do it. But I'm giving myself a little extra support and taking a couple breaths, and maybe even noticing like I'm going to pick, these are all classic things that people in the field of psychology, psychiatry, and mindfulness and related fields would be doing, but you'd want to look at like 3 things that you can see and 3 things that you can smell and touch and whatever. Those things, those throwaway things that I'm saying are actually quite useful for when you're watching a tornado, unless asterisk, somebody's going to be physically harmed if you don't intervene. But absent of someone being physically harmed if you don't intervene, that's why you wouldn't, your kid is running across the street, and there's there are cars coming, you're not going to put your hand on your heart and then go grab them. That would be a bad idea. But absent of that, we get our own system regulated so that we can lend our nervous system to our kids or our teenagers. I wouldn't say the words out loud unless, especially as they get older, you want them to just get more angry with you. It's just something you're doing internally that they will catch in, because, humans are relational, and it just helps when you think about like, you walk into a room with people who've been fighting or arguing, and then they get silent because you walked in. Everybody knows, that there's something in the air. So we just have to remember that there's something that we can provide to make the air a little bit easier to breathe in. And then, and I know, Lisa, you talk about this too, but in the heat of the moment, when you have a really disoriented and dysregulated person, is not the time to say anything about like, tell me what's going on, or, let's just take a breath, because that probably is going to make it worse. But your presence is going to make it a little bit better, unless it's not, in which case, to give them space. And I think respect sometimes gets this, like, can turn into an issue of like, well, what if they're screaming at you or saying like it's all your fault that something is happening? And I think we all have a right as adults or humans that if somebody is punching us in the face, metaphorically, that we can say, I'm gonna not, you can be this angry and you can be this upset, but you have to do it in a space where it's not harming me. So either you can excuse yourself or I'm going to excuse myself. But the conversation about what's going on and the connection is probably not going to happen in the heat of the moment.
I love it. Right. And just that way of like, our instincts mislead us.
Yeah.
Right? Our instincts are like, how do I contain this? What do I do? Questions, fix. And we all know.
Fix.
Yeah, and we all know, like, it's so rare that a kid's like thank you for that suggestion, right? In those
Right.
moments. It's
That's
so
what I
cool.
needed to do.
Yeah, that they're like, "Right," it takes it up several notches. So getting one self-regulated, giving space to a kid while they sort it through a bit.
And then later we get to offer, whatever it is. Um, but and that's when we can ask how to be helpful. And that's when we can maybe, do you want my advice or do you want me to listen or what's going on here? But none of that can happen in the heat of the moment. And we also, I just like, I'm reminding myself too, but like, we don't have to be, um, that we need to be, obviously we need to be a steady presence, but we don't need to be harmed in the process. Like we don't need to be a martyr that's just like, I'm here. I think of this example. I don't think there's a world where my aunt and cousins would be watching this, so I'm going to just give this example. But this was like 30 years ago, but I remember going home, my cousins were way younger, 15 years younger than I was. And they were coming home after school and just being so nasty to their mom. And then she just kept bringing them food, and she was and she was like, and by the way, not that food, I mean, I have a kid who gets hangry. Like sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm not even listening to this until this person eats something. And it can be as simple as that. So, know your kid. Um, but I remember she said to me, well, they just, it's their end of their day and they've been great at school. And so they're melting down. These were not 2-year-olds. These were 15-year-olds. So I was just like, oh, note to self. I can see the temptation. And I loved how understanding she was. And I can see the temptation to say, I will be there for you to kick in the face, and I'll just keep bringing you cupcakes and, make you happy. But that's not really helpful either, because then you're just perpetuating this cycle of like, when I feel this way, I can just treat this person that I love in this terrible way, and they will continue to serve me. And I don't know that that does anybody any favors. I think at that point, it's like, I'm happy to make something. I'll bring it to you when you're ready. But I deserve to be treated with a modicum of respect and kindness.
I love that. I love that. Which brings us to rules. Number 4 of the 5. Okay, so what rules? Let's think about some rules. And I'm thinking especially in this back to school mode. I love routines personally. Like I just adore them. I think it's why I'm so excited that school is underway, because now we can start to get our
Oh,
routines back
I'm
in
so
order.
that person too. Like I'm like, oh, September is my favorite time of year, like a weird.
It's like,
Like,
here we
I'm
go. Here
back.
we go. Um, and so that also means we're starting with a bit of a blank slate about how we do certain business, especially school related business. Um, talk to us about why rules matter, and then what rules, especially as we think about things like homework, how it's done, where it's done, what would you recommend?
So like really quickly about rules, I think rules are very unpopular right now. Rules have been, the science of human development really just tells us very basically we need this connection and relationship and rules, but it's just called different things. Rules are boundaries and limits and guardrails and whatever. It's all one. I just called it rules because it was an R word and I wanted to make it easier. But rules outside of the context of relationship can cause a lot of battles and problems. Rules in the context of a loving relationship, where you know that your parent isn't making these rules just to make your life miserable, but they've actually thought them out, they've reflected on them, they've, decided like, as your parent, this feels like a pretty important way to keep you both emotionally and physically safe. And so I'm not going to be afraid of your reaction. Rules are really important. But we have to believe in them, because if we don't, if they're not aligned with our values in a deep way, when our young people say to us, you're the only parent and blah, 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 we're going to bend and they're not going to mean anything. And then you get into this cycle of pretend rules, and they're just not meaningful. And you kind of end up being super sensitive, but a little bit permissive. So rules are really important. And I think when you believe in them, you don't feel as, You don't chase around your kids' emotions to try to make them say, thank you for this rule. I really appreciate this rule. So let's just assume that if you believe the rule really, really matters for your child's safety and well-being, that they're not going to thank you, they're not going to agree with you, and it's going to be hard and there's going to be pushback. So don't bother with them if they don't matter to you. But once they do, I think the beginning of the school year is such a wonderful time to say, like, hey, let's have a sit down about what our goals are for this year. What are your goals for yourself? What
Mm.
are, and I like to do that for me too. And even go as far as this is I think just an exercise that's fun to do is just like, let's write a little letter to ourselves that we can look at the end of the year. So that rules are like, they're part of our developing of our whole internal value system and our kind of personal North Star. Because what I want are the rules that we have as parents for our kids. Eventually, hopefully, we become adults who have nice boundaries and limits for ourselves and the people that we interact with. It's hard to have those if your entire life you never practiced setting them up. So I like asking and being, obviously you're still the final decision maker. We're the adults. But I like asking, okay, what are your goals for this year? How do you plan to meet those goals? What rules would be helpful? Um, and also like just do a few things that really, really matter to you. And let's not waste our time with the little stuff because if you have a list of, I just had somebody that I was talking to said they had um, all these, battles with their kid. This was for a teenager, all these battles with their teenager about what they were doing and they were nagging them all the time and nothing was working. And I said, well, what are your three really most important rules that you have for them? So she sent me a note back and she did here's the first one, here's the second one, here's the third one. The first one was take care of yourself. And then underneath that was 500 different self-care rules about sleep, about, hygiene, about the household, blah, blah. And then two, be respectful. And then, 50 things on the list of how you can be respectful. Anyway, it was not three things that really mattered. It was 300 things. So I think part of the starting off the school year is like figuring out what really matters to us, figuring out our goals and how do the rules align with those goals, and helping our kids feel like we're all kind of on the same team figuring that out.
Love it. Okay, so you got rules. You're holding those rules. You decided on the ones that matter to you. You're sticking to them. Um, your kid is giving you a really hard time about them. Maybe you've got a rule around, when homework begins and where it happens and how it happens, and you have real conviction around this. And your kid's in a, kind of spicy place, gives you a really hard time about it. You react in a way that you really wish you hadn't. Don't like what you said. It brings us to your fifth principle, repair. Talk us through, why does repair matter? What does it look like on the ground?
So I want everybody to feel like we can, plug all of this into any of our interactions. And so, of course, we're going to have rules that upset our kids, and we're going to have expectations. When they're not met, we're going to lose our minds. This is just part of it. This is just going to happen. And I hope it happens because it gives us an opportunity for repair. And repair is part of the developmental science that is just so stunning to me because just like muscles that we have to rupture in tiny little ways when we're exercising in order to grow bigger muscles, those relationships grow bigger from the tiny little ruptures in the relationship and then the coming back together. And then you are stronger and stronger for it. And I think this is what we have to kind of lean into when we said the thing that we regret. And I will say I had a terrible, I think I told Lisa about this. I had one of those terrible fights with my daughter. I've never had a fight like this where she's a senior. And I had this argument with her, and out of my mouth flew the kind of thing I would have said to my sister when I was 16, like just like not proud. And my words could be pretty harsh because I know who I'm dealing with and what might like get in there. And so I was so ashamed and I sort of stormed away, so ashamed of myself. And I was like, repair is baloney. Everything I say is baloney. I'm a fraud. This is nonsense. This whole, everything. Anyway, 20 minutes later, she came into my room and she said, "You probably are looking for some repair, huh?" And we both laughed. And she sat on my bed. And then within, I don't know, a minute, she was talking about something else and totally, you know, getting into it and going into the details. And we were fine. And I, in that moment, was like, oh my God, I love this so much. I love this beautiful thing of being a human being in relationships where we really, really know our kids are so sure of our love for them that we can have those moments where we get really angry. And I'm not talking about all the time, but some of the time where we say things we regret, where we make a rule, we make our kids so angry, and then we double down on the rule in such a way where we say, well, if you weren't so, and then we've now criticized them and we just are ashamed of ourselves. It happens to everybody. But that if you have the humility and self-awareness to say, I really don't like what I just said there. I really don't like how this just happened. I'm so sorry. And you can reconnect. And sometimes it's not so obvious. Like sometimes it's just you end up huffing away, you both walk away from each other, and then a little later you're watching a TV show and laughing hysterically at the same joke and kind of coming together, and you kind of know like, oh yeah, we're good. But I just love repair so much because our relationships need it. We're continuously reminding our kids through repair that in healthy relationships, there's a sturdy foundation and lots of crazy earthquakes can happen around it. That's because I live in LA. And so I also think it can alleviate a lot of the perfectionism in parenting right now by saying to yourself in those moments when you regret what you did, and I'm not saying to try to make mistakes, you'll do it anyway, but in those moments to just be able to say like, I am feeding this, I'm like making this muscle bigger so that my young person knows that love is not conditional and that people make mistakes, but the relationship is still good. It's still there and we can always come back to each other and they can grow up and make lots of mistakes and not think like, I guess this is it. I guess it's over now. So that is a gift for all of us. And I think repair is just like, it's just a reminder that we can't be perfect and that if we were, we wouldn't have the opportunity to grow that muscle.
Love it. Okay, I have two more questions for you before we wrap up. So first, what have you changed your mind about in the course of the time you've been working as a developmental psychologist? Like, what was something that you were like, I really thought this? And then as I worked with families at Mount Sinai and worked with families and looked at the research and raised my own kids, you shifted how you were thinking.
I think the thing that I have changed the most about is that there is, I think in the beginning when I was just doing research, and I think even when I had younger kids, I really believed that if you did certain things, you'd get certain outcomes. And it would be the same for everybody. And so what I think is interesting now is how important it is to take into account context and culture and history and experience and temperament in a way that maybe I knew lightly academically, but I just didn't buy it.
Mhm.
Like I didn't believe it. And now I feel like we cannot control as much as we think we can. And I really don't think I believed that before. And I've completely changed my mind. Like does parenting matter? Very much so. Does it matter as much as I thought it did? Not remotely. Not remotely. And so I think a lot of it is, and I hesitate to say that because what are we doing here then? But it does matter. It's just that we do not create our kids in the way that we think we do. We do not mold them the way that we think we do. They are themselves and we can support them. But I think I'm not entirely sure I believed that there was like a particular seed that was planted with a flower that was going to grow either way to be that flower. And we were responsible for that sunlight, water, and soil. I think I believed that you could like provide a particular kind of sunlight, water, and soil, and then you would always get a particular kind of fabulous flower. And it takes a lot of pressure off the parenting. I think what matters is that the small percentage of parenting that does matter matters deeply and is in our control. That I think is true, but I question a lot of my younger stuff. And the other thing that I've changed my mind about back and forth is like how we define attunement and how important it is.
Mm.
I think I used to think it was enmeshment
Mm.
and constantly I'm here. And now I realize that that is not what being attuned means. Like you don't have to be so on top of every minutia moment, experience, and emotion that your child is going through in order to have a real connection.
Hmm. That there's room. There's room
There's
for
really a lot, you know what, said more succinctly, there's much more room than I realized.
Okay, so then along those lines, and this is the other question I had, and you just teed it up perfectly. What you said just now about like, so there's things in some ways that parenting has less influence than we maybe thought it did. I think the analogy of the seed and the water, soil, sunlight, I think is so perfect, right? Like that there's so much that really is predetermined about our kids, and we can cultivate and help support that, or we can get in the way of it. Um, but so that water, soil, sunlight really matters. So if you had to choose one thing, and I know this is hard for us as parents to focus on, like, that captures that idea of water, soil, sunlight, like, what are we here for? What are we providing? If you had to choose one thing for families to think about as they go into this glorious new year, what would you have it be?
You know, my brain is like, what will my kids think? What would my kids say that I'm obsessed with? And I actually think you and I are fairly aligned on this one, but I think sleep, I've been obsessed with it always because it's just so darn impactful. And so when you're making rules about phones, it's not because I'm obsessed with the phones, it's because I'm obsessed with the sleep. Um, and laughter. I think those two things are extremely powerful sources of sunlight, water, and soil.
I love it. I love it. And sleep and sleep and sleep. And actually, I'm just going to say, I'm going to bold and underscore. When you say impactful, you and I are suddenly pulling through a Rolodex of the research studies on the impact of sleep.
Yeah.
I don't know that we're always articulating those things. I mean, we're talking about, reduced stress, improved academic outcomes, reduced suicidality, improved emotional regulation. Your kids aren't going to get sick as much. They're less,
Yeah. Thank
yeah,
you.
it is,
Everything.
it is
It's
attention,
so
focus. I mean, across the board.
totally. If I see people, their children are diagnosed with an executive function disorder or challenge or whatever. And there's like, what are the 500 things we're doing in the household and how are we organizing and how are we doing all this? But nobody's thinking about sleep, which reduces a lot of the risk of a lot of these things that Lisa just mentioned by like half. So it's so, so impactful. And then when I say laughter, which seems so much lighter than sleep, I just mean like, then you're connecting, then you're in. But sleep, it's true. I think we talk about it, but we don't underscore that it is so deeply rooted in the science of like name an outcome for what we're hoping for our kids. And it's going to be impacted so powerfully that it's almost the first question I think a lot of us ask, how's sleep going? Because without that, everything else is kind of like a Band-Aid on a giant wound.
That is a beautiful metaphor, slightly like less upbeat maybe than we might have been.
Sorry, it's not the way I want to
And
end
if you
it.
flip it around and instead think sunlight, water, and
Yes,
soil, sleeping, that your flowers are gonna bloom all year. It's gonna be a
thank
great
you.
year.
Thank you. Yeah.
I love it. David, over to you. Gilda, over to you.
Well, I just want to
Thank you
say
so much.
we just hit a home run because we gave all our high school students an extra half hour of sleep because we're starting the schedule a half hour later. So we've
So
been,
great.
as I noted earlier, getting ready for a couple years to launch a schedule, and part of it is starting a half hour later. So I'm feeling good. That's great. No, thank you so much. One of the themes I took is the sort of the pressure is off, right? This framework takes a little bit of the pressure as you read through them and think about them and reflect on them. It's less pressure. It's being present and focusing on relationship and flow of communication. And the last thing is how cool it is that each of our kids are this wonderful, mystical, almost mystical creatures that are different from each other. And each person is a wonderful creation that's unto themselves, that the environment, including parenting, does shape them, but they become to be unique individuals that are special. So what a great part of our lives, and obviously being parents.
Thank you. For me, so many of the wonderful experts like you two ladies talk about the relationship is everything. The relationship with your child is everything. And what I'm taking away from this conversation is the important piece of the self-awareness to make that relationship as solid as possible. And to really think it might not be about you. It might not be about your needs. And bringing in, what my own background and what expectations I had, but really that if we want to get to the relationship, that self-awareness skill is really going to cement that, isn't that? Well, as you said, we could talk all day. We have so much that we've already covered. This is an amazing book. This is an amazing book. At 7 p.m. Central Time tonight, Aliza will be back talking with us again. And this time, the author of this new book, 10 to 25, The Science of Motivating Young People, David Yeager, will be interviewing. So if you just can't get enough of Aliza, if you just can't get enough of GPS, then come back at 7 o'clock. Please share. Thank you, everyone, for the gift of your time. And we can't wait to see you again soon. Have a great year, everybody. Thank you.